Sounds like Kip had the same thing I did.
All right, let's.
Linda?
There we go.
His is in his neck, right?
All right.
Vertebrae.
As you can see with the information before you, we are dealing with Exodus 22, 1 through 15 this morning as we begin our trek across the 22nd chapter of Exodus. We're going to talk about biblical doctrine of private property today and applications with regard to that doctrine. It's going to explain mostly what to do with loss of private property, who caused it, what happened, the circumstances surrounding it, and what proper recompense and restoration is for it. It's basically an exposition, an application of the Eighth Commandment. As we were mentioning before all of us arrived, the Eighth Commandment presupposes something. It presupposes the concept of private property, because you can't steal something from someone if there's not private property that they own before God to have it stolen. It requires that concept. So God himself instituted private property. So trying to get rid of that concept is utter foolishness. It won't work. It can't, because it's messing with how God made the world. Over the last several weeks, we've talked about the Sixth Commandment largely, the applications of it, showing what real justice looks like with regard to it and violations of it. The Sixth Commandment being, you shall not murder. We've seen the origin of the lex talionis, the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth concept that was put in there, and also how important it is. It gives just punishments for crimes, and it also not only lets the punishment fit the crime, but keeps someone from going farther than they ought to with regard to said punishment. So you don't get to cut off someone's hand because they stole a piece of bread, for example. That's not just. The Eighth Commandment was introduced as well. It pertained to animals and the loss of them or by them. Animals fall under the category of the Eighth Commandment because they're property and they're not people. Because if someone were to kill a person, the life of the person is required. If an animal is destroyed, if the animal takes the life of a person, the animal is destroyed. And that sort of thing. We're going to see that even more as animals are taken under the Eighth Commandment in this text that we're going to be looking at. So we're going to begin on that. We're also going to talk about the Castle Doctrine briefly because it is kind of mentioned as an aside in this text. What exactly is that? How does it apply? Any questions? Let's look at them. Exodus 22, 1 through 15. The doctrine of private property ends the Castle Doctrine. The first thing we're going to look at is what happens with the theft of an animal. The theft of an animal is recorded in Exodus chapter 22, 1 and 4. The Castle Doctrine kind of sits in the middle of it in verses 2 and 3, so we'll bounce back to that when we get there. It says, if a man steals an ox or a sheep and kills it or sells it, he shall repay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. If the stolen beast is found alive in his possession, whether an ox, a donkey, or a sheep, he shall pay double. All right? Once again, when we look at a text like this, we see the difference that we have between what happens if someone steals an ox or a sheep, an animal, or if someone were to kidnap someone and say sell them into slavery. Stealing a person. Because what happens if you kidnap someone and sell them into slavery? You die. Why? Because human life is more valuable than animal life. If you take an animal, you have to pay it back. That's the law. And that category distinction is extremely important. This, I believe, and I think we can rightly say this, the proper deterrent and justice for the theft of an animal. Because it's what God said. And, as I'm sure comes as a little surprise, it seems to be a bit of a difference from how things get applied these days with regard to private property or other things. The person who steals an ox or a sheep and kills it or sells it shall make it good, the text tells us. What does it mean? Well, first of all, there's not a fine paid to the state here. No jail time is administered. What? Yes, the clicker spec, which I'll hold this in my left hand so that'll work better. I have this problem. No jail time is administered with rare exceptions. Imprisonment is not a biblical punishment. Just categorically. What happens in the case that we've already seen with our text? If an animal is taken, you pay back animals. You pay back the property that was taken. He's not locked up. He's not fined by the state to pay the state. He simply pays back with what he had done.
What if he doesn't pay it back? I mean, who's forcing him to pay it back?
The judges. The judges who are basically, we'll talk about that as well. But again, You don't have a vigilante system. These are just the categories of justice that are expected to be administered by the rulers of the land. The elders of the land, you've seen that terminology come several times. The judges. In our text today, we will talk about someone being, quote, brought before God. Well, what does that mean? Well, they're going to be brought before the people whom God has appointed, who are acting in the place of God to administer his law to the people. The judges, the rulers of the land. And of course, as things would develop, you not only have the elders of the city, you have judges that are appointed in the book of Judges, you have kings eventually that get appointed in Samuel and Kings, and they are expected to administer according to the law of God. In fact, the king was required to write himself by hand a copy of the law of God, probably the book of Deuteronomy, so that he would have it in front of him and rule in accordance with it. So you have civil authorities that God sets up that are expected to rule like this, because this is the law of God. Good question. Now, so no jail time is administered. Prison, it was used in severe cases when someone was awaiting trial, not as a sentence for a crime committed. That's the difference, which is so very different from the justice system that exists today.
Yep, it was either recompense or death, basically.
Generally, or, well, this is kind of recompense. We'll talk about that here in a minute when we get down to that part of the text. But there's examples for this, though. When someone who's accused is awaiting trial, what do we have? Well, we have a couple of texts. You can look at Leviticus chapter 24, verses 10 through 12. If someone would grab that one, and then there's Numbers 15, 32 through 34.
I got Numbers.
Mike has Numbers. Someone please grab Leviticus 24, 10 through 12. There's the other one.
You say 24?
Leviticus 24, 10 through 12.
Now the son of an Israelite mother and an Egyptian father went out among the Israelites, and a fight broke out in the camp between him and an Israelite. The son of the Israelite woman blasphemed the name with a curse, so that they brought him to Moses. His mother's name was Smith, the daughter of Jeribi the Don. They put him in custody until the will of the Lord should be made clear to them.
All right, we see both of those things going on in this text. First of all, when he commits a crime, what do? They bring him before Moses, Moses being the judge in the land at the time, of course. And then what do? Verse 12, they put him in custody. Why? Because what were they waiting for? The will of the Lord to be made clear. He committed a crime. We're having you in custody now, a brief time of jail, if you will, until the sentence is rendered and the will of God was made known. And then the sentence is carried out and there's no punishment with regard to the jail time. In this case, he gets executed, I believe. But we're not going to continue reading that particular text. We're going to go to Numbers 15.
So they brought him to Moses.
Right. Moses being the judge of the land at the time. I mean, who's going to have a higher authority than Moses with regard to the people? You won't find one. But go ahead, Mike, please.
While the people of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation. They put him in custody because it had not been made clear what should be done to him.
The punishment for what he had done had not been made clear yet. So what do? They bring him before all the congregation, is probably meaning the elders of the congregation. And who else? Moses and Aaron. And then what do? They put him in custody and waiting for the verdict to be read. That's what happens. So when they're waiting for their appearance before the judge and waiting for the sentence to be issued, they're in custody. But after that happens, it's not going to be kept in custody. Prison was not used as punishment for the crime itself. Instead of the prison for a crime, what do we have in our Exodus text that we talked about earlier? What is there? We read it, verses 1 and 4. What do we see in Exodus 22? We don't have imprisonment. We have recompense. They pay back animals for the fact that they stole animals. Now, because they don't just pay back one animal, by the way, I'm sure you noticed that. They pay back 5 animals if they take an ox and 4 if they take a sheep. But why did they pay 5 for an ox and 4 for a sheep? Why that difference, do you suppose?
Because the ox is worth
The ox is worth more. The ox is going to be pulling your plow, perhaps. I mean, you can get wool from a sheep, but you're not going to be able to plow your field with it. So the ox was considered to be more valuable in that society. That's why.
They took it. They didn't have 4 to pay back, so what did they do then?
We'll get to that. Text does cover it.
That's
an important question.
What happened?
Money.
Well, there could be that, but there's also, the text does deal with it. We'll get there. Let's see. But why 4 or 5? Not just 1. huge deterrent. I mean, if you're going to go steal somebody's animal, and you know if you get caught trying to get rid of that animal, sell it or kill it or whatever, you're going to pay back 4 or 5 of them. That's going to make you think twice before doing it.
Very few people back then owned
Sure.
4 or 5
And
oxen.
what Linda was talking about,
Still
do I even have that many to pay back? Do I even have that many to pay back? If you don't, what happens? Well, we'll talk about that. And he wouldn't like what happened. I will say this up front: he doesn't get executed because these are animals, not people. But he does have to pay.
Or pay back double.
Right, it's a double. So that's the next one the text talked about, right? So the situation is double rather than 4 or 5 when we get to verse 4. Why is that? What's the difference? The text tells us what the difference is. In verse 1, what does he do to the animal?
Found alive.
He kills it or sells it. That's what happens in verse 1. Not good. So it doesn't even happen anymore. But what Diana said is exactly right. In verse 4, it's still with him. It's still found alive. So he has to give the animal back. But then he has to pay one more to it because he committed a crime against his neighbor and has to pay for his crime done. There's your justice.
That's punitive damages.
Punitive damages, exactly right. And then he's made it good. It's over. Case closed. We don't have to have months in a court system or lock him up for years or whatever. It's gone. But there's a little bit more to that though, because what's the situation? Maybe he takes it, gets a guilty conscience because of it. It's like, I stole this animal. I'm going to take it back to my neighbor. It's wrong. I did a terrible crime. He takes it back. He returns it to his neighbor. He asks for forgiveness. What happens then? What if he returns it before he ends up getting caught by the authorities? The scripture deals with that too. It deals with it here. Leviticus 6:4-5. God's word covers all of this stuff. Isn't this great? I find it fantastic. It's wonderful. Any problems here? All right.
If he has sinned and has realized his guilt and will restore what he took by robbery or what he got by oppression or the deposit that was committed to him or the loss of the thing that he found or anything about which he has sworn falsely, he shall restore it in full and shall add a 5th to it and give it to him to whom it belongs on the day he realizes his guilt.
All right. So he returns it, but then he adds 20% of the value to however much it's worth and gives it to him as well. Because he still took his neighbor's stuff. Now, he wasn't caught by the authorities. He doesn't have to pay back double. He didn't kill it or sell it. He doesn't have to pay back 4 or 5 times the amount. He realizes wrongdoing, he repented of it, and his part of it. And the damage in that case is just 20% more. But the moral of the story is really pretty simple. Come clean and repent before you're found out, because it's only going to get worse. Yes! How about you not doing it at all? But again, the deterrent factor of it. Because listen, if you do this,
Must have been a lot of crime.
I don't think there was much. We don't really have a lot of examples of this sort of stuff. In fact, as I rack my mind, I have a hard time coming up with one that is recorded for us in Scripture. I'm sure it happened from time to time, but it wasn't so prevalent that God made note of it. Because when you have this kind of a justice system in effect, people look at that and go, I can't afford that. And what happens if I don't? Well, we'll talk about that too.
Things were just so different. Like you didn't have a thing that you could go and get money from a credit card. I mean, you had whatever was in your possession.
Yes?
Well, actually, the banks took the place of this because whatever they wanted, if they used it and got money from it, then they had to pay that to the owner because they took the owner's stuff, just like when we go to the bank, pay the interest. I mean, it's kind of,
This is
I
really a
think the
concept.
system
Sure.
I think the system's taking place of it.
In modern times, it would be easier to pay something like that back because you could access, because someone's resources in a bank could be what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. They could be taken as payment for such a crime. Then the court could order that to happen, of course. But
Yeah, I just think
Maybe they had a trigger.
But the field, get a cow.
but your point is valid. It's simple. This is simple. Justice should be simple. And if it's not simple, then it's not quick and it's not a speedy trial. You don't have those things. That's why we have the problem. Justice these days is not handled simply, and honestly, it's not just.
So people's
But
months.
just look at the so that he dies, there shall be no blood guilt for him. But if the son's risen on him, there shall be blood guilt for him, he shall surely pay. If he is nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. There's the answer to your question. If he can't pay back the animals that he's taken, he's sold into slavery that we talked about before for a few years to pay back his debt in that case. It works it off. But then after 6 years of slavery to whom? The person against whom he's committed the crime, not locked in cell. And after those 6 years are done, he's free. Pay back, his debt's been paid. But if he breaks in at night, and the homeowner takes him out, no blood guilt. This is where the Castle Doctrine idea comes from, the idea that a man ought to be able to feel safe in his home, in his castle. If someone breaks into your house at night, and you don't know what they're in there for, you don't know if they're coming in to kill someone, if they're going to take something or whatever, if you kill that intruder, then there's no guilt on you, according to the law of God, and according to Indiana law. Indiana law reflects this, and it also has to do with your own property. If you're sitting on your property, someone's breaking in your property, sneaking around inside your yard, fiddling with the door, behind it, inside your fence or whatever, game over for that person. It's at night. Why the difference between night and day? Well, what can you not do at night very well that you can during the day? See? If someone breaks in at night and there aren't any lights on, and you don't know what they're in there for, bang! You're protecting your family. You don't know what they're there for. If he's armed or not, it doesn't matter because he broke into your house. And his blood's on his own head. No crime committed whatsoever. That's the law of God. That is, in a nutshell, where the doctrines of the castle, the understanding of the Castle Doctrine comes from. In Indiana, it's spelled out a bit more specifically. You're not required to retreat or move into a back room like they do in some other states, which is silly. But you can defend yourself and your family on the spot. If the intruder is killed in the process, so be it. You shouldn't have broken into your house. You shouldn't have broken into his neighbor's house. Commit theft or robbery or harm.
So do you shoot to kill or shoot to
Never shoot.
Yeah. If you're shooting.
Depends on how good a shot you are.
Well, and also, here's the question. I mean, would I rather have someone wounded and disabled than killed? Sure, but I have something that I don't know. If someone breaks in, how many guns does he have? Right, how good a shot am I? How good a shot is he? And how well are we reacting in the split second in the middle of the darkness?
Yeah.
I don't know how nefarious his intent is. Are they coming in?
Because we don't really abide by this law like we should, there also, if you shoot him and wound him, he's going to sue you and
That can happen, which is also wrong.
yes.
I still don't understand why the difference between night and day. I understand.
Well,
Definitely you should be there at night because that's just not the thing. But during the day,
well that's an important question, and there are a couple of things that relate to that. I mean, let's see. That's about that. Right now, light dies. That's on the thief. But if day dawns and the homeowner sees the thief and kills him, then the homeowner is liable for murder. Why? The answer to the question is, if you see him there and say you have a weapon out or pointing it at him, like, don't shoot. Oh, okay. On the ground, hands on your head, gun on you, call the police. If it's obvious at that point that he doesn't have a weapon, he's not trying to kill you, because you can see now, and you just want to shoot him in the middle of your house, no, you want to say, no, but you're on the ground, you crawl under my couch.
Some people don't even have a gun.
Not the same, right,
They
they
come
don't.
in
With the
But
idea,
you don't know that at night because it's dark. During the day.
during the day.
but the point is, if it's obvious, once you've confronted an intruder, that he's scared out of his mind, whatever, but he's still broken, he's still committed a crime. It's like, no, we're not going to kill you, but you're going to crawl underneath my couch, or whatever, and you're going to sit there, and I'm going to call the police, and they're going to take you away. Now, the related thing to this,
I'm just thinking home invasions.
Well-
I lock my door all the time.
oh yeah,
Day, night, it doesn't matter.
and there's something else that's going on with this too. There's another factor going on. He's aware that this is important. If he's aware at this point the man is not trying to kill him and doesn't need to defend himself, that's the qualification. Because you can have a situation even in the daytime if someone comes in, he kicks in your door, and he's got a weapon, shoot him. Because he's obviously trying to harm you. That's a different situation from someone who's trying to be crafty, is a thief who's trying to sneak around and gets confronted by the homeowner and freaks out and stands there like this. Well, that's not the same situation. That's what the law is trying to distinguish between.
somebody breaks into my garage and takes my Harley or my lawnmower or whatever, so be it. I've got insurance. You know, you come into my house where the grandchildren, my wife are at, then you belong to me.
There you go. Especially at night.
I don't know if I'd wanna make the determination whether he's coming in with a gun or he's going like this.
Well,
Yes.
you should think about those kinds of things.
But that, in that case, you're a woman living in a house by yourself.
Yeah.
He comes through the door, you feel threatened for your life. That is your
You make a
right.
quick decision.
That is your right.
But generally speaking, also, we've seen these kinds of stories with religious in a general thing. We've had those statistics that just with firearms used for self-defense happens hundreds of thousands of times in the United States a year, even a couple million times. But you don't hear about them because use for defense doesn't mean they've been fired. It means that they've been produced. Because anyone with any sense in his mind, if you're running someone's like me, they think they're going to cause trouble. Well, you pull a gun. If there's any sense of them in his mind at all, he stops what he's doing. Turns and runs, puts his hands up, whatever. If he keeps coming at you, then he's trying to harm you and then threat, and then it's game over. But that's an important difference. And the law of God tells us that we need to be thinking about those kind of distinctions. Again, why? Because human life is valuable. That's why. If he's not actually trying to harm you or those you love, then the idea should be, well, let's try to preserve his life. He's committed a crime, let the authorities, the judges deal with him, and we'll end at that. And that way, I also don't have the death of someone on my own conscience. But if you're attacking my family, there isn't another decision to be made. I'm responsible to protect them.
There's an organization called the Concealed Carry Organization.
There are a couple of them, yeah.
And they're always advertising that you can be, the good guy defending his family from people end up in jail if they don't have the right representation.
That's because
When you join them,
wacky laws.
they represent you and they also offer training to help you stay out of trouble.
USCCA is one of them. US Law School is another one.
Well, I think when you said that, you have to think about yourself too, how after the fact, how that's going to affect you.
Sure.
Thank God's protecting you there too,
Yes.
What's the other one besides the USCCA?
US Law Shield was another.
US Law School.
But anyway, that was just kind of an aside in the middle of those two. That took up most of our time, but that's okay because the rest of it did.
That was the Castle Doctrine.
Right. That's the basis for the Castle Doctrine.
Okay.
That text.
Now I got it.
Yeah. Leviticus,
I knew it, but I didn't know
yeah.
the title.
Exodus 22, 2 and 3. That's where it comes from.
Okay.
That the Castle Doctrine, generally speaking, as it exists in modern U.S. code and state codes, is an application of the general equity of Exodus 22, 2 and 3. That's what it is. So we like those laws because they reflect what God has said. And that's the only reason why, and that's a sufficient reason. Verses 5 and 6, accidental property damage. If a man causes a field or vineyard to be grazed over, in other words, you pay attention to your animals and they eat your neighbor's field, or lets his beast loose and feeds in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best in his own field in his own vineyard. If fire breaks out and catches in thorns, so that the stacked grain or the standing grain of the field is consumed, he who started the fire shall make full restitution. Accidental property damage. All right? This is property damage. Well, what exactly happens? Property damage, either caused by you, something you own, or or someone that you're responsible for. What does that mean? It means you are responsible for the damages. Period. I owned it, it caused damage to my neighbor's stuff. He's in my household, he caused damage to my neighbor's stuff. I was trying to burn trash in my backyard, the wind blew up and got into my neighbor's yard and burned down his field or damaged his house. I'm responsible for that. I'm responsible. Very simple. The word of God makes it clear. Like, I didn't know that what happened. I was like, you started the fire. You left the gate open. You. That's it. No excuses. No ifs, ands, ors, or buts. This is what the word of God says. This is the law of God. Property damage has to be retained. And furthermore, obviously, this isn't something that is done intentionally. These are accidents. I didn't mean for my animal to be grazed. It's not like I was trying to burn my neighbor's stuff. It just happened. Yeah, you caused it. And that's what responsible. Accidents are included. Now, what kind of restitution is required? There are two words that I emphasized briefly as we read that text that tell us what kind of restitution is required. What are those two words?
Full restitution.
That's one of them. Full restitution and the best restitution. You don't just get to give some cheap thing in order to try to make restitution for what happened to your neighbor. You are required to give up the best of what you own to pay back your neighbor because of your negligence. No half-hearted attempts to make amends. No, give them the best you have to pay back. That's what the law of God says. The law of God cares about private property. It cares about your neighbor's stuff. But God does. This is a reflection of the character of our God. This is what He told us. He told Israel. So, you end up with those kind of statements. What do you have? What would naturally follow from this kind of a requirement? What will somebody do to prevent this sort of thing? If I'm going to have to pay back the best of my neighbor, aside from the fact I'm supposed to love my neighbor anyway, to care about him with his stuff. If I have to pay back the best of the stuff that I own, if I damage it, I'm going to make sure that those fire poles are out when I'm burning something before water runs. I'm going to make sure my gate is locked, and I'm going to check it again before I go to bed and make sure my animals go to bed. That sort of thing. It will prevent the negligence because of the restitution of the requirement. That's the point, and it's good. It helps eliminate carelessness, because if you're careless, you owe. What if the property is under someone else's care? If a man gives to his neighbor money or goods to keep safe and it is stolen from the man's house, then if the thief is found, he should pay double. We saw that, some of that already with regard to the stealing of an animal. Same thing if it's money or goods or whatever. He takes it, they find it with him in his house, he pays back double what he took. The thief is not found. The owner of the house shall come near to God. There it is, coming near to God. They go before the judges who are representing the authority of God over the people. This is not vigilante justice. Never has been. This is the requirement. If the thief is found, the owner of the house shall come near God to show whether or not he's put his hand to his neighbor's property. For every breach of trust, whether it's for an ox, or for a donkey, or sheep, or a cloak, or any kind of lost thing, there's the catch-all. Anything of which one says, this is it. In the case of both parties shall come before God. The one whom God condemns shall pay double to his neighbor. Same requirement. If a man gives to his neighbor a donkey or an ox or sheep or any beast to keep safe, and if it dies or is injured or driven away without anyone seeing it, an oath by the Lord shall be between them both, to see whether or not he put his hand to his neighbor's property. The owner shall accept the oath, and he shall not make restitution. But if it is stolen from him, he shall make restitution to its owner. If it's torn by beasts, let him bring it as evidence. He shall not make restitution for what is torn. All right? What do we have? It is. There's a lot there, but it's all in the same category. There are several things going on here in this text. All kinds of property are dealt with. Everything is mentioned.
Did you say he shall not? Are you in verse 12 of 23?
I was in verses 12 and 13 just then.
Because this says, if it was stolen from him, he shall make restitution to the owner. So
Yes.
that makes the guy that's keeping it safe responsible for the loss of the property if a thief comes in and steals it.
Well, if the thief steals it, the thief is going to be responsible for it. Part of the text talks
But
is the
it says
question.
here,
If no thief is found.
Then they take an oath
if
about
it
it.
is stolen from him, he shall make restitution to the owner.
Where are we here? Let's see.
Where do you
Verse
at?
12, 13. No, 12.
Right. If the person is supposedly keeping it safe, think storage in this case. He's got it somewhere in storage. If he's responsible, says, well, it disappeared. Maybe it disappeared. Well, it's gone. Someone else has stolen it. Well, they search around, and it turns out the guy who was supposed to be keeping it safe actually is the one who still has it. He just moved it somewhere else, but then he's the thief. He pays back. The thief breaks in, who's not related to it, takes it. They catch the thief, of course, then he pays back. That's what we see here in these verses. Stolen from the man's house. If the thief is found in the case, he's the one who pays double. Now, there's a couple of other things going on here. We'll work through the description of it. You have all kinds of private property, money, goods, the animals, doesn't matter. The thief, when caught, must pay back as with anything else. We looked at this earlier in verse 7. Back in verse 1, verse 4. It's found, the thief pays back double with an animal just like anything else. So in verse 7, we have someone who's given goods or money to a neighbor for safekeeping. The neighbor is providing a service. He has some extra room in his property to keep something that their neighbor didn't have room for. He's putting into storage, they may be locking it up. Your stuff is there, that's fine. So if someone breaks in and steals the item, the thief, when caught, must pay double with anything else. That is verse 4. He paid back what he took and more because of the crime. But if the person who is keeping it is accused of wrongdoing, you have an investigation by the judges. That's what it means when the text says they're brought before God. It says that twice. They're brought before people whom God has appointed to serve as judges in the land, the rulers, the leaders of the city, who are Moses and Aaron, people that are going to render a just verdict. In that case, an oath is taken. No, I didn't do it. I don't have your belongings. Someone stole them. I don't have them. Then they investigate it. The oath of innocence is investigated. But then if it's never found, they search thoroughly to take it. I don't have it. Someone stole it out of this. So that it was locked up, it was secure, someone broke into it. I can't find it. The word of the person who gave the oath is accepted. Nothing is paid back. That's what the text says.
Does it say that in some verse?
Yes, it explicitly says so.
Which verse is it?
It explicitly says so. If you're looking at Exodus 22, about verse 11, an oath is taken, the owner shall accept the oath, and he shall not make restitution. That's what the text says. Again, he is determined to be not guilty by the judges. Not found. The thief is not found. The owner says, take it. I was doing my best to keep it, but someone broke in and took it. Well, then he is acquitted in that particular case. But he found not to be the one to put his hand to his neighbor's property. Now, the oath of innocence is explained. You notice something else? He's also not liable because of acts of God. That's a category. Warranties have that category. Not warranted against the acts of God, like lightning strikes or hurricanes, or in this case, if it's torn by wild animals, if there's another animal. He has a fencing situation, like I suppose a beast runs in and tears up one of the sheep and runs off. All right, God brought the animal into here and destroyed that. That's an act of God. And of course, bringing before God, explain the situation that, oh, wild beasts destroyed. God says, no, you're not liable for it. Acts of God are not covered, so to speak. And that wraps up what happens in those kinds of situations. If someone is keeping it, his neighbor's property, on his own property. Now, that is to be distinguished from what the text tells us here. Something that is borrowed. Not something that is on another's care, that is on his property, but something that is borrowed. What's the difference between something that is borrowed and something that you have on your property?
Is that the distinction between whether or not they have to pay it?
Yes, there is a distinction in that. Yes, there's a distinction in that.
I mean, borrowed is you're borrowing it.
You're asking to use.
That's it
something.
right
So
there.
you're
I'm
supposed to be
using it.
responsible.
I am using it. I am using it for my own benefit. It is in my hands. I am doing work with it, whatever. I don't have it in my shed over here, keeping it for safekeeping under lock and key.
But what if you're babysitting it? Like the guy's moving or going to the military and he wants you to keep his stuff and it gets.
That's
That's what we talked about on the previous
Okay,
text.
so that was the one where he takes a note.
Yes,
So
exactly
he
that.
didn't put his hands.
Like I'm not using it. It's simply locked in my attic and or that's
You're storing.
So it was
Right, I'm
there,
storing it for
if he borrowed it, it was there for his benefit, then he takes responsibility.
There you go. And that's exactly what the text says. If a man borrows anything of his neighbor and it is injured or dies, the owner not being with it, he shall make full restitution. If the owner was with it, he shall not make restitution. If it is hired, it came for its hiring.
So you work for a company, you break something, it's not your responsibility.
Well, it's on the person's property when you're using it. The person's property is not responsible.
Well, if the owner is with it in this case, that's that's a totally great application of this. Yes, because you're basically in the case what you were just describing, the company's hired you on, and you were working for the company and using stuff that belongs to the company to do the job that they've assigned to you.
Like
If it gets damaged or used up, well, that's the company's responsibility.
Well, there actually have been companies that charge their employees for loss or breaking tools.
I suppose it would depend on how it's broken. That would be something that would have to be sorted
Yeah.
out in the contract and in terms of employment.
Well, it's a
But
normal,
read those things carefully.
the normal use of things, sometimes they break. You
Sure.
can say it was negligence or carelessness, but.
But with
Have you-
regard
If
to
you hired
this,
somebody, Jeff, and they broke one of your tools, would you pay them?
I haven't, but I know owners that have, and I thought
it would
sometimes
depend on how you're
that
using
was
it.
questionable, sometimes.
I had a reporter one time that took $100 deductible out of my check to cover the deductible for the insurance on his truck. Got wrecked on his truck.
Oh,
Well, it wasn't my
Yeah,
fault.
those things would be-
You could make that a contractual obligation.
Yeah,
that was in
those are
there.
the things that would happen. The item I am borrowing from my neighbor is not in storage, but it's in my hands and I'm using it. I have his garden, how I'm digging, I'm farming my field with it, and I use it, and then it breaks or disappears or whatever. Well, then I'm responsible for it. I'm responsible for it. I'll make full restitution just like before. But watch this. Why? That I was taught when I was younger, I suspect most of you, if not all of you, were as well, that when we are have something, borrowing it from someone else, we take extra special care of it. We are careful with that which belongs to someone else. And if something happens to it under our care, we are responsible to make it good.
If I borrow somebody's truck and it has half a tank of gas in it, when I
You put a full
borrow it,
tank of gas in
it's going back with full tank.
because it belongs to someone else. And you had a privilege of using something that didn't belong to you. Your neighbor was kind to you, and you're going to love your neighbor and treat that right and treat your neighbor.
Yeah, that's a good attitude.
That's how it ought to be. And we need to be teaching our children and grandchildren that. So many people these days don't have that attitude.
Right.
Which is a couple of things. It's the failure of parents and grandparents, but it's also the failure to have application from biblical texts like this. The root of all of
What
this
if the
is
transmission goes out? You loan him your truck and the transmission.
well, you have to wonder how bad the transmission was in the first place too. Make the investigation. Take it before the judges. That's where this stuff comes from.
Yep.
Now, if the transmission goes out because he was drag racing at 90 miles an hour in the country, well, maybe that's going to be different. But in this case, the point is that people are responsible for this sort of thing. People need to be taught this. Because this is what God has said. If something gets lost or destroyed when you borrow it and you're using it, you're responsible. But it doesn't apply, of course, like we were talking about with regard to the fact the owner. And the example you gave I thought was really good, Mike. If an owner shows up and he's helping you harvest your field, and he's the one driving the tractor, not you, and the tractor breaks down, he was with it. He's the one who did it, still his responsibility. Now, if the tractor was in good working order, and you borrowed it, and you hit a big hole in your field with it, and the tractor breaks, and he wasn't there, you are responsible for the aforementioned tractor, and no one else. All right?
It's just common sense.
It is really.
It should be.
Yes, it should be.
It is common.
It should be. But one of the things that we can look at is that when we've taught these things to our children, and we've had these kind of principles that have existed in society before, when we read through this, it forms us something very important. Those kinds of things are not arbitrary. They just didn't come out of thin air and someone decided it was good to pay someone back in such a way or not. They are rooted in what God himself has said and the eternal character of God. That's why we do those things. That's why it's important to teach them and practice them and recover.
The problem is that some majority of our laws today are not based on God's principles or common sense, either one.
Well, common sense flows from it because we're made in the image of God, and we realize we read these things like, yeah, that is good. That is good. But that's what we need to get back to. Let's read Exodus 21 and 22 before a state legislature sometimes say, why don't you all act like this? We couldn't do that.
Well,
Why not?
how about the early application of the law where the guy was found picking up sticks on the Sabbath, and then he was stoned to death.
Yes,
That's one that's going to be thrown up in Christian spaces as,
well, brother, we don't have time to expound that now, obviously. It's already 10 o'clock. But when we're covering that text at some point, we will expound it. But the thing to keep in mind is, at the very least, is what we mentioned when we started talking about applications of the law of God in the first place. So God said that. So was it good and just?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
How
also
can you
I
say
think
that?
it
Because
shows
God
that
is just and we're not. That's why.
also maybe that the Sabbath should be kept holy and that it is serious. And
It's fourth
that our
commandment.
society has.
And it's in the 10. It's a creation principle. The application of it is a little bit different nowadays because the ceremonial law has been fulfilled in Christ, and Christ has been crucified and resurrected, which is why I mean the first day of the week, not the seventh day of the week. There are some different applications, sure, but the principle remains. But, I'm not going to go into my 15-minute sermon on the Sabbath right now, but we're going to pray. We're going to get going. Thank you all. This has been very good. We'll continue next week. Lord God, thank you for your awesome word. It is so good to discuss these things. It's so important to realize what you put in your word, justice, which is good for us, and how things can be taken care of, and things made whole, people restored, your word upheld, and love for you maintained, and love for neighbor. And we do so. We look forward to worship as we gather and praise your great name, sing praise, and hear your word. Praise God, in Jesus' name. Amen. Right.
But it does say if the owner is present, he doesn't have to pay.
Mark of the life, close
The owner is present. That last question, if the owner is present, he doesn't have to pay.
Right, with regard to
Something happens.
property, yes, something happens to
That is what the text is, and therefore that is what is just.
No, well, I had to decide Friday night whether to open at 12:30 at night or just.
We repeat.